Everyone. Welcome to the second in Creative Workplaces series of monthly webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about working for yourself within the arts and culture sector. My name's Simon Abrahams. I'm a very proud member of Creative Workplaces. I'm on the Creative Workplaces Council, and I'm also the creative director at Melbourne Fringe, and I work as an independent arts consultant as well. So I spend a lot of time in my life working with independent arts freelancers, independent artists, and I spend time being a contractor myself. So this is a webinar very near and dear to my heart. Creative Australia acknowledges the many traditional owners of country throughout Australia and honour their elders past and present. We respect their deep and enduring connection to their lands, waterways, and surrounding clan groups since the beginning of time. We cherish the richness of First Nations people's artistic and cultural expression. And I also want to acknowledge and pay my respects to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arts colleagues joining us today. Welcome. Before we get started, I want to begin with an apology, which is to say that we don't have Auslan interpreting today, unfortunately, but we do have captions, and the Auslan interpreters will be edited in and added in the recording of this session. So there are captions available, and there will be Auslan interpreters on the next version, on the recorded version of this session, which will be able to watch at the Creative Workplaces website. Now, last month, we presented a webinar on wellbeing, which was hosted with our colleagues at Support Act, which included some incredibly valuable insights on how to maintain positive mental health while working in the arts. So if you missed it, don't panic. You can watch that recording back. It's on the Creative Workplaces page, which you'll find on the Creative Australia website. And if you head there, you'll also find a recording of a recent update on the work of Creative Workplaces, which was recorded by our incredible chair, Kate Jenkins, and director, Kate Schaffner, the two amazing Kates. And don't forget, if you haven't yet, you should sign up to our mailing list to stay informed about all the Creative Workplaces activity. If you don't know, Creative Workplaces was established for artists, arts workers and organisations, and our role is to promote and enable fair, safe and respectful workplaces to benefit the entire arts sector. And our aim is to support everyone working in the arts to understand their rights and to meet workplace obligations by providing information and resources and referral information about pay and safety and well-being. So at Creative Workplaces, we recognise artists as creatives, but also as workers. And our role is to empower artists and workers and organisations with information about pay and safety and well-being. So we've got a vision for a fair, safe and respectful workplaces for everyone in the arts so that we can just get on with doing what we do best, which is making extraordinary art. And in today's webinar, we're going to explore what it is to work for yourself in the arts and sector. And reality, of course, most independent artists is that legally, at least, you're a sole trader or a small business. And we know that working independently is a complex and sometimes incredibly confusing process. And it can be really hard to ensure that you're meeting all the legal and financial obligations, but also to make sure that organisations who you're working with or who you're contracting to are meeting theirs. And we know too that there are so many systems in this sector that make it difficult for independent artists and contractors and arts workers to navigate. So today, we're going to really focus on the practices and processes that you can utilise to make your work life easier. And we're going to highlight some common challenges and how you can best navigate them. So I promise there is going to be time for questions at the end. So you can submit your questions using the Q&A function anytime, whenever they come to you during the chat today. Just pop them into that Q&A function, and we'll come back to them towards the end of the session. Then after our Q&A, we're going to be joined at the end of the webinar today by Kate Schaffner, the incredible director of Creative Workplaces, who'll give us a short update on the work that she's been doing and talk about details about our next webinar as well. Okay, let's get in with it, get onto it. I'm delighted to be joined today by the Victorian Small Business Commissioner, Linda McAlary-Smith. Hi, Linda. The Victorian Small Business Commission, the statutory authority that aims to create a competitive and fair operating environment for small business to operate, grow and prosper. Linda, you commenced your role as Commissioner in August 2021, and you've got 2 decades of experience working as a regulator with experience in workplace relations, in building and construction, with business regulation more generally. And you're also on the board of the Australian Ballet, who just launched your season this week. It looks fantastic. Our Auslan interpreter, Alana, has just joined us. Welcome. Linda, you're the Commissioner in Victoria, but we know your knowledge spans the whole country. And it's my great pleasure to introduce you, Linda McAlary-Smith. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you for that lovely introduction. And it's wonderful to be able to talk with everybody today. As Simon says, I'm the Victorian Small Business Commissioner, but what I'll be talking about will apply wherever you are in Australia. And we've got some great links that we'll be sharing at the end of the webinar around how you can access different services in your respective states as well. So thank you so much for your interest. I would say that with the questions that we'll have later too, this is a super safe space. And there is no silly question, and there's no question that I won't have heard before. And running a business, running your own business is really tricky, and it's not easy, and it doesn't necessarily come naturally to you. In my day job, I've dealt with lawyers and accountants who are really good at helping people run their businesses, but rubbish at running their own businesses. So I really encourage you to, any questions you've got, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll endeavour to get to them at the end of the session. So I've got a bit of a slide deck to share with you, so just bear with me. We'll get that fired up and going. Okay. So just a quick word about the Small Business Commission. So Victorian Small Business Commission, and there is a commission, Small Business Commission, every state except Tassie. And then there's a federal Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, as only government people can come up with titles like that, for federally as well too. So we've been going for 21 years, and we're an independent statutory agency. So we're funded by the taxpayer, but we're separate to government, which is really important. So we can provide independent advice and support to small businesses, and also realistically give all levels of government, local, state and federal, a hard time when they're giving small businesses a hard time. So that keeps me pretty busy, as you could imagine. So the Small Business Commission is here to help avoid and resolve disputes that small businesses might find themselves mixed up in. And we also keep a really close eye on trends and patterns that are happening in the small business context, so we can get on the front foot from an advocacy point of view as well. A question I get asked, if I had $1 for every time I got asked this question, I'd be lying in some tropical island all the time, is what is a small business, and what's the definition of a small business? And look, there's more definitions than I have fingers and toes. But in reality, we take the approach that a small business is self-defined, and particularly in the arts and culture sector, where you're usually working as a sole trader or as a very small business, potentially having maybe 1 or 2 employees or people who come and help you from time to time. We rely on businesses to self-identify as small businesses. So if you do need our help, or if you're in another one of the states, please always feel free to reach out to your small business commissions and commissioners, because we're here to help you. So what I'll be talking about today is some steps for setting yourself up for success in how you run your business. I'll be talking you through about some of the tips and tricks for what I've seen work with other businesses. And that's also as Simon said, carbon dating me sadly in my old age around how long I've worked as a business regulator. Almost 20 years I was working regulating businesses right across the country in industrial relations space. So creative workplaces is something that's very close to my heart as well too. So I had the opportunity to see across every kind of business from every sector, right from the teeny tiniest right up to some of the biggest listed companies in the country. And I've had that benefit of seeing where mistakes happen, what businesses might have done differently with the benefit of hindsight. But I've also had the benefit of seeing businesses that are getting it right as well too. So I also work really closely with agencies such as the tax office. So I'll share some context with you for that in terms of some of their areas of focus as well, because I'm no doubt you might have seen in the press around the focus on some of the work that's happening in the tax office space with the ATO, particularly around them chasing small businesses who owe them money. So we'll kick off with around structuring your business. So the very first piece of advice I would give you is please be thoughtful and purposeful and really deliberate in how you set up your business. I should say too, like if I'm telling you stuff and you're like, oh, the horse is kind of bolted on this, it's never too late. It's never too late to go back and go, you know what, is this business structure working for me? Will it work for me going forward? Yes, no, it's never too late to have those conversations. But I really do encourage you to be really thoughtful and purposeful about how you set your business up, because there's pros and cons to different scenarios. And what I've saw through COVID, and particularly around eligibility for grants that governments might have been giving to small businesses who are having a really tough time with lockdowns and the like, is that often I'd be dealing with a small business who kind of didn't necessarily really understand or appreciate why their business had been set up or structured in the way that it was, that effectively they'd kind of handed that over to their accountant to make that decision, or their bookkeeper, often the accountant, and they hadn't really sort of stopped and gone, okay, is this right for my business right now? Does this allow my business to grow? What are the pros and cons to the different sorts of structures? So I really, really encourage you to be really thoughtful about that, because if you don't get that foundation right with setting up the structure of your business right, you risk it becoming a bit of a house of cards. So make sure, like a house, make sure the foundations are nice and solid, and then you can build your house up. And if you have, depending on your aspirations, you might want to go, okay, well, I might one day want to make this a two-story house. So I'll make sure the foundations are extra solid so that I've got room to grow in your business as well too. So realistically, in the arts and culture sector, as you know, and as Simon said, and as he himself has said, is that a lot of people are working for themselves, which is amazing. And can I just say a massive shout out to all of you? No one chooses to be self-employed because they want a cruisy or easy life, and dare I say it, no one goes into the arts and culture sector because they want a cruisy ride too. It's because you're passionate about the sector, you're passionate about what skill you have, or you're passionate about working in an environment with creatives as well too. So and thank you for that, because we are so much better for it as a community and as a country. So we don't take it for granted. So most people hanging out their shingle for the first time would usually operate as a sole trader. So as ABNs, you'll all be across an Australian business number. If you don't have one, it's super easy to get one. It only takes about 10 minutes or so online. A really important point to keep in mind too, that because you apply for an ABN, you're the one deciding that you're a business. So sometimes I'm having conversations with businesses or other entities who put a lot of stock in, oh, that person has an ABN. So the ABN is just a means of identifying your business, obviously, but there's a whole separate kind of structure that can kind of sit as part of that. So you've got options when you're setting up your business to be as a sole trader and trade in your own name, for example, or you might want to come up with another name that you want to have a trading name, and you can still do that as a sole trader. But it's really important, if you're choosing a business name, to search the business name registries to make sure no one else has got that name, because the last thing you want to do is have confusion in the market. You don't want to get a nasty letter from someone because you've jumped in and they're using their business name as well. So this is the part where being really structured and purposeful is really important. So you get your ABN, you decide what your business name will be. Realistically, it is easier for you to trade in your own name because you're just allowed to do it. But if you're wanting to come up with another kind of name or a version of a business name, then definitely check the business register to make sure that someone else hasn't jumped in first as well. And then you've got options around, do you trade as a sole trader? And when we say sole trader, what we mean by that is you as the human being is the legal entity. So when we've got business structures, we talk about the legal entities. So if I'm a sole trader, I myself, Linda, the human being, is a legal entity, which means the buck stops with me. It means I take the profits, pay tax on those, of course, and I bear the rewards and the risk. You do have options to go into partnerships with other people as well too. So, and you might have a range of arrangements that apply across the sort of the spectrum of the work that you're doing. I've seen people who work in some capacity as a sole trader, then for other particular opportunities, they might be in partnership with other people. And then they're also director of companies as well too. So you don't have to, in the breadth of the work that you do, and particularly the type of work in the arts and culture sector, you don't have to just pick one. You can have different ones for different points of time or types of work that you're doing. So partnership is basically two people coming together to work together, and there's some legal consequences that sort of flow from that. You can have trust arrangements too. If you're getting into anything that's getting into being complications of partnerships and trusts and companies, I really encourage you to reach out to get some legal advice on that. When it comes to setting up a business, kind of the legal advice can be, cost a little bit. I do encourage you really to have a look around for fixed fee providers. Back in the day, many moons ago, when I was on the tools as a lawyer, it was all, 6-minute increments, and it was all by the hour, and you had no idea what your bill was going to be until you got a shock about the lawyer stung you at the end. If you jump online, and I can't obviously recommend anyone specifically, but Google is your friend. If you jump on online and do some search for online fixed fee legal services, you can find some really brilliant lawyers who will give you a fixed price to say, hey, I want some advice on how I should set up my business, or I want to set up a company, and you can actually get a fixed fee for that. So there's no surprise, and they're often lower than what you would be paying on an hourly basis as well too. So companies can provide an advantage in the sense that because a company becomes its own separate legal entity, which means that a lot of the risks that you might have as a sole trader sit instead with the company. So it's separate to you. So if I use an example of, say, I set up a consulting business and I set it up as a company, and I gave it a red hot go, and I did the best that I could, and look, at the end of the day it wasn't successful, or it stopped being successful, and I had some debts, or I made a mistake during the course of that, running that business. In a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases, the liabilities the things that could get me into trouble live and die with the company. So if I've got assets in my name, for example, and I do have a company that, I haven't done anything dodgy, but it's just swings and roundabouts of having a crack and being in enterprise, is that sometimes that doesn't work out. That then the debts stay with the company, as opposed to if you're in the current environment, fortunate enough to have a house, your house isn't on the line and that sort of stuff. So one of the things Australia's introduced over the last couple of years is what's called a director ID. And the idea for that too is that each human who becomes a director of any company gets a unique identifier that follows them around to every company. And that grew out of some directors, very, not the bulk of them, obviously. Most people are doing a good job, but came out of people doing dodgy stuff. So, dodgy shutting down companies, or doing funny stuff. So now you have to track a director. So in my directorship, for example, with Australian Ballet School, I've got a unique identifier for being a director of the ballet school. So the structure can get a little bit complex, and if you're moving beyond being a sole trader, trading in your own name, It's a bit like travel insurance, I think, like in terms of the legal fees. It's a bit like that idea that if you can't afford travel insurance, you maybe shouldn't go overseas. So I really do encourage you, if you can, to reach out to find a cost-effective way to get legal advice to make sure that you understand the pros and cons of what you're doing. Now that you've got your business structure and you're up and going, well, what are some of the fundamentals about how to actually run that business? So great record keeping is really essential. And I don't just say that as a nerdy lawyer. It gives you a sense of structure and, again, staying purposeful about the way that you're running your business. So we would really encourage businesses to jump into the online accounting platforms, and there's a couple of examples there, but whichever works for you. A lot of them have really competitive price points for just as an individual, particularly if you're not employing people. So really do encourage you to do that. The platforms these days are designed so that you can actually run your business in the way you need to, set up reminders about invoices. You can actually issue invoices through the portal, and I'll talk a little bit in a little while about e-invoicing and a way to protect yourself from scams as well. It's also a really good way of tracking all your expenses that makes it easier when it comes to do your tax and GST collected as well. So it's really, really important to keep in mind at the moment is that the tax office is taking a much stronger enforcement stance with respect to debt that the taxpayer is owed, that they're collecting on behalf of. As you might have read in the paper, they had taken pretty much parked all their enforcement action during COVID because of how hard it was for small businesses. Unfortunately, small businesses make up the bulk of the billions of dollars that are owed to the taxpayer that the tax office needs to get back. And the couple of the really common ones that it's not so much I'm a small business and I made profit and I haven't paid tax on that profit. The bulk of the debt that small businesses owe to the tax office is GST. So someone else has paid that money and the small business has collected it on behalf of the taxpayer and they haven't passed that on. Other things are to do with if you do have employment, you are employing people, superannuation. And I call out those two things because the tax office is now going after that really hard, and not unrelated to other people have paid. So if a customer's paid their GST, of course that should go into the taxpayer via the ATO, and the same if you've got workers who are entitled to their superannuation, they should get that as well too. So just the reality of running a small business is often to smooth out the lumps and bumps of cash flow. Our small businesses, it's not uncommon for people to sort of be trying to, just, pay bills 1 month or 1 week just to, use some of that money to keep the liquidity of the business going. I really do encourage you, because it's getting tougher and tougher over the next few years. So payday super is coming in, which if you do have an employee, you'll need to pay their super when you pay them as well. It won't be quarterly. So the best businesses I've seen and the most successful are those who don't rely on that money to keep their business going. So they've got separate accounts set up, for example, in their bank. They've got separate accounts set up that say the GST goes bang into there, doesn't get touched except when it gets passed to the ATO. And the same for other employee entitlements in particular as well. And I catch up with the big banks a lot because they've got amazing data that's really accurate. It's not about what people fill in on a survey. Like, I can actually see what we're doing in our credit cards and our spend and our bank accounts and stuff. And all of the banks are really, really well set up to help support you in running your business. They've got really cool budgeting tools and apps and things that you can use. They can set you up with different accounts so that you can run your business in the way that you need to. And on that, I would say too, it's really important to keep your personal finances and your business finances as separate as you can. The reality of running a small business is often you're having to rob Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. It's just the way of it. I grew up in a small business household, and that was normal. But as much as possible, to have separate bank accounts is, again, good business hygiene to set it up. We know that small businesses are often their personal funds are funding the business, and that's not to say that that's wrong. It's just that you're really clear on your bank accounts and things, and that you know what money you've actually got to spend sort of as your working capital. Some other things to think about when you're running a business, and I should say, like I said at the start, like running a business is hard, and there are ways that you can make it easier for yourself, and there are ways to sort of prevent yourself getting into tricky spots or help reduce the chances of that. And there's a lot of great help that's available out there for you. The hard part is that it's finding the time to have a look at this stuff as well too, because you're out there sort of trying to get work in the door, you're servicing your clients, you're trying to have a life at some point as well too, and then the mechanics of running a business can be time consuming. So I've included some links on the slides which you'll get a copy of afterwards, where it just takes you straight into some things which are really handy for you. So in Victoria, and there were equivalents around the states, Business Victoria has some great stuff around setting up, I say, a marketing plan. It's got great cash flow forecasting templates and also guidance on how to price for profit, which I'm going to spend a bit of time focusing on because it's really, really important. The tax office as well also has a whole heap of stuff to support businesses that actually isn't so much to do with tax. It's about businesses being run well and trying to help small businesses, because then they pay tax. But they've got great stuff that deep dive on the business structure stuff that I've covered off at a pretty high level today, what your tax obligations would be, how to go about registering a business or a company if you decide to take that next step. And there's also great tax guides for small business as well. So I really encourage you to reach out and have a look at those, because there is some really great help that's available. Some of the key things that we talk about around, which can sound like crushingly boring, but is really important. If you're starting a business or you've found yourself in business already, a business plan and financial plans and budgeting and cash flow forecasting. Now, that's the kind of thing that, might make you go, oh, this is, not my skill set, or it's super boring, or I don't need to do it because everything's going well right now. But having that, again, business hygiene, to have that stuff in place. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You could have a business plan that is a page or two. What's your offer? How are you going to look at pricing your things? Where's your market? How are you going to get the word out to the people, your your customers that you're trying to connect with? What are your future aspirations as well too? And that goes into planning for your cash flow as well. If you can look ahead and know what expenses, or have a good guesstimate of what your expenses might be, that can be really helpful as well too. So just don't hesitate to reach out for all of that stuff, because particularly Tax Office and Business Victoria, and if you jump on my website, you'll find links to, and when you jump into other state commissions, you'll find links to whole heaps of content. One thing to keep an eye out on is unfair contract terms as well. And the Australian Competition and Consumer and Competition Commission, I always get that around the wrong way, ACCC, has got some great information on their website about unfair contract terms, because I don't need to tell you about the inequity in bargaining power that you have as either, performers, those working in the creative space, working the arts and culture sector, being self-employed as a smaller trader up against others who are either larger entities or have a huge amount of influence in your industry. So encourage you to have a look at some of the consumer protections for small businesses around unfair contract terms as well. Because we know that if left unchecked, people who have more power will, draft contracts so that basically you're giving up everything and they're getting everything. And the federal government has recently introduced some changes extending some protections to small businesses. So encourage you to have a squiz at that too. Now, pricing for profit. So you're running a business, and I know you'll be passionate about whatever your skill set is or what service you have to offer to the broader sector. But when you're running a business, it's really, really important that you price for profit. And that seems crushingly obvious, right? Of course, you're not in it as a charitable exercise. But the amount of small businesses that we encounter every day at the Small Business Commission who are really struggle with this point, and particularly in an environment where there's a cost of living crisis. And if I use a cafe as an example, if you've got all their costs of running their business rocketing through the roof, they know their customers are under pressure from cost of living pressures, interest rate rises, the whole shebang. So they don't want to raise their prices because they're scared that they'll lose customers because it'll be too expensive. And they also know their customers, and they know if their customers are in a pressure point, they don't want to add to it. But that is just an unsustainable model if you're not pricing for everything you do that you're making a profit. That's the whole purpose of being in business, is to actually make a profit. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing dirty or shameful about it. It's actually the whole point. And that's one of the beauties of being self-employed. Like, it is an incredible thing to create your own employment and to be creating your own work and sustaining your own living as well too. So it's really important that you make sure that you're effectively getting paid enough for that. We've put a link in there to some examples around what do you charge, because you might not know. And look, there's some good stuff, I think, happening in community and society around trying to break down some of the secrecy and awkwardness about talking about money, and in an employment context around what people get paid, and not being allowed, no longer you're allowed to, employers are no longer allowed to ban employees from sharing what each other get paid. So if you feel comfortable, a good sense of if you're starting out or you're moving into different spaces, or you just want to sense check, if you're comfortable asking your peers or your trusted network, what kind of rates they're charging, or what they think it would, what would be a fair rate. The National Association of Visual Arts, as an example, have got some freelance rates as indicators as well too. Really important to remember to price in all your expenses as well. So consider the opportunity cost of, if you're not working in employment, like what are you actually earning, and make sure you've got a really clear scope of work that's articulated in your agreement when you're working with people. So you know what you're promising to do, and also your, their undertaking when they're going to pay you. So I'm conscious of the time, so I'll speed it up. I'll speed it up a little bit. So getting paid on time, really important. So establishing a really shared understanding with the person you're contracting with. So putting it in writing doesn't need to be fancy. It can just be an email. What are you doing? For what price? When are you doing it? How are you going to do it? And when are they going to pay you for that? If you're doing something with a bit more dollar value, you can include some extra terms around what happens if you're late, any extra fees that you might do for overdue payments. And I do encourage you to have a look at the templates on Business Victoria, which work across the country, that you can adapt for that. E-invoicing is a functionality that is actually available through those software providers, the bookkeeping software providers. And e-invoicing is a great tool because it's a secure link directly out of the software providers, directly to who you're dealing with, which means the payments can be made securely kind of through that link. You can clearly tell I'm not an IT person because they'd be horrified with this language I'm using. But it really minimizes significantly, like, the issue of your emails getting hacked and BSB accounts getting changed and your customers paying the wrong account and stuff. So heaps of information available on e-invoicing, so I encourage you to have a look at it. If people are late, so staying on top of when you are paid, when you are due to be paid, staying on top of that from a time perspective is really important as well. So diarising, again, doesn't need to be anything fancy, but remembering when you're, particularly if you're juggling a few different balls, remembering when you're due to get paid and then being prompt, because letting people know that you're on top of it. I've got Nick from my team who's on the call here today, and we're dealing with some creatives around getting our content done for our annual report at the moment. And we have to hound them to give us their invoice, and I'm trying to pay them, and I'm desperate to pay them, obviously in my role, of course, to pay them quickly, and the amount of calls we had to make to go, can you please send us the invoice so we can pay you, and we pay them straight away. So just getting that normal rhythm, that this is part of how you operate. This is part of the way you operate. So when people deal with you, they know that they're having a professional experience too. And for those who might choose to take a bit of advantage of you or pick and choose who they take advantage of, don't let you be that one. Because if they know that, right, I'll get my invoice on time and then they'll follow me up the next day if it's on the overdue, people can just, sometimes that drives more compliant behavior for you to get your invoices paid. It's really awkward asking people, particularly in your sector where word of mouth referrals, it is a small world. It's really awkward when you're having to chase up unpaid fees. So there's some great templates you can click on there around follow-up email templates to actually nicely and sort of gently pursue the outstanding payments. My advice always is, particularly if you're going to have ongoing relationships with those people or in your industry, is if someone is late on paying you, start from the assumption that they've just forgotten or it's slipped through the cracks to kind of make it give people, because that may well have happened, because the people that you're dealing with have their own challenges running their own business as well too. So they may have forgotten, they may just have yet slipped through the cracks. And so just, and if they haven't, it also gives them a bit of face saving to go, oh yes, sorry, I forgot that, what have you. So you start out with the emails or the calls or what have you, just warm and friendly. And then, if you need to be more persistent, then you dial up a little bit more of the formality of your language, which takes me into if you need to write a letter of demand. Again, we have a template for you to take all the hard out of that. My advice to you wouldn't be don't jump straight to this right away. That would usually involve a pretty significant escalation of a relation and lead to a relationship breakdown. You will be the best judge of the characters that you're dealing with as well too. So you'll be the better judge of when to do this. But I would normally suggest a formal letter of demand come after you'd had a few goes of trying to get the money yourself as well too. And just be really clear about, what you're owed and when it was expected. And that's why sort of in terms of when we talk about how to avoid a dispute in the first place, as much as you can, choosing to work with people and offer your services to people that align with you. Now, arts and culture sector is a super competitive environment, as you know. You're not always going to have the luxury of going, no, I don't really like the way you operate, so I'm just going to choose no. It's not always going to be open to you, but if you can, choosing to work with people where you think there's an alignment of values and there you can both see a mutual interest. So they benefit from your success. So if you kind of frame it in that way, people who want you to be successful, that's a really good starting point. And again, being really open with your communications and talking about this stuff up front at the start is so much easier than if things go pear-shaped down the track. So if you've had some conversations when you're starting a commercial relationship with someone about, look, this is the way I operate, I'll send you these invoices, I'll follow up. If you've got any issues, give me a call, we'll talk it through, what have you. If there's any issues with the quality of my work or what I'm doing for you or services, just let me know, just to sort of normalize that at the very start. It's almost like prenup's a bad example, but kind of have those kind of slightly awkward conversations when there's a really positive vibe around what you're doing for them as well too. And if you find yourself in terms of in the middle of a dispute, some tips for de-escalating it, make sure you've got all the relevant documents. When you do those invoices, make it as easy as possible for them to pay. So if you can have credit card facilities, that's great. Be really clear. If they've got a reference number that they've given you or a job number or whatever, make sure that goes on your invoice. So whoever's paying their invoices, if they've got a bookkeeper, you've got details, in the description so that there's kind of no reason or any friction about when the person, whoever that is looking at the invoice. There's nothing that causes them friction in terms of paying you. And that's where the e-invoicing can help with that as well. If you do need to have a conversation with someone around this sort of stuff, make sure you're in the right headspace. So make sure you're in a good space. Don't call someone chasing money when you're running between things or you're already stressed and feeling in a really emotional state. Give yourself the best chance of having that really productive, professional conversation that gets you your money when you're in a calm and a good headspace. We at the Commission, we often come in after the event with disputes, and some of these things from our perspective over the 20 years can really help about not escalating and assuming the best of the other person, at least initially, so that you can go into that frame, giving them room to move and do what you need them to do. So really happy to take any questions. Now I'll turn that slideshow off in a second, but I've got our details there, and you'll receive the slide pack as well, so that you can actually click on all those links. And yeah, so Simon, sorry, that was a whistle-stop tour of all things business.
Not at all. It was fantastic. I feel like there was so much great advice in there, be nice. Who'd have thought it? What great advice. Get a prenup. But also, for me, really practical things in there, keep my business and personal bank accounts separate,
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone on this call would put their hand up as sort of guilty as charged at some point of the things that you've talked about that we haven't done. But lots of incredible and great advice in there. I wanted to add as well, you pointed out NAVA, the National Association of Visual Arts, who have freelance rates for people working in the visual arts. I know also that Theatre Network Australia, TNA, have a similar freelance and independent artist rate. So if you're an independent theatre artist, dance artist, circus artist, Theatre Network Australia have those freelance rates, and the Association of Authors as well, the ASA, has a similar thing if you're a writer as well. So that's one of the biggest questions that people often have is how much do I charge? And
Yeah.
going to those bodies is a great one.
And
Um,
it's so hard because you kind of go, you want to ask for as much as you can possibly get, of course, and you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by then asking for too much and pricing yourself out, and then you always worry if they agree straight away. Oh gosh, did I not ask for enough? Are there as well too?
exactly, exactly. I mean, that tends to happen not that much in the arts. Generally, people get bargained down, but absolutely
Yeah,
on the occasion that it does, you go, I
yeah,
should have asked for more.
yeah.
We had lots of questions coming in, and in particular, there's been a number of questions about superannuation. Um,
Yes, yes, yeah,
and I know, I think maybe it was last year, there were some changes around the legislation for when you can charge super. In particular, I think for a lot of independents, and actually for organizations, it can be really confusing. People are wanting to know, do they add the super to their invoice? Does the organization pay the super directly to their super account? What
yeah.
do they do?
Oh, it's so tricky, and I'll have to give like partly a wishy-washy lawyer answer, which it always depends. And so you're right, like with super. So in the olden days, super used to be thought about more as an entitlement for someone who is in like employment. So sometimes casuals got it, but in regular employment, so there wasn't a contracting relationship. And then over the years, that sort of shifted because when the communities recognised the whole purpose of super, it shouldn't matter if you're self-employed or not. And so that now it really comes to so you can be working absolutely as a contractor, and the entity that you're dealing with can have an obligation to pay super on your behalf. But it will always depend on that case by case basis because there's a range of different things that get factored in. So, do you have control over the way that you do your work? Can you get someone else to do it? There's a whole range of different things. Um, Super, in effect, is usually not really meant to touch your hands, is probably the best way to put it. So, if you're dealing with an entity that does have to pay your super, they're meant to pay that directly into your super account. So, and this goes to us not raiding the piggy banks of super, like saving us from ourselves effectively. And then if you're self-employed and you don't have that entitlement to super, a lot of people who are self-employed will actually have their own superannuation accounts and put it in as part of their business planning. So that goes into your pricing for your costs. So I would say even if there's not an obligation for them to pay it for you, you should be ideally factoring in you putting aside the equivalent superannuation amount in what you're charging them. And if you then are the one who needs to put it into your super account, good and well, but making sure that you've got that money going into your super account. The ATO has some really good info available on their website, which we can share the links for as well around how to figure out who pays your super. Like, is it me? Is it the person I'm contracting with? And they've got some checklists and tools where you can kind of go through and apply your own circumstance to it, and it pops out with a kind of an answer at the end as well. But yeah, definitely it's a great question because keeping an eye on your super is so important.
That's it. I think, it's obviously such a key topic, or else we wouldn't be getting so many questions in there asking
Mm.
about super. So I think that answer of it depends is the perfect one, but it's one that people really do need to get across, I think, for their own individual circumstances. And it does seem like it's one that employers sometimes get wrong. Even the questions coming in, people are
Yeah.
saying, I've invoiced for it, but it hasn't been paid. So I think people sort of understanding their rights on that one as well. Some of the other questions we've been getting as well are around GST,
Oh,
um,
yes, yes, yeah.
and sort of how much do you need to earn before you register for GST? And if you're
Yeah.
not registered, do you just write on your invoice not registered? Can you
Yeah.
give us some tips and tricks about GST?
Absolutely. And GST really can't, registration for GST or not being registered for GST really, the rubber hit the road with that during COVID. So double check on the ATO's website, but I'm pretty sure the threshold is 75 grand for when you then, when you don't have to pay it to when you do. Um, I would encourage, and this goes to getting the good advice from a trusted advisor, be it in a really good accountant, like a business focused accountant or lawyer, what have you, is that the future focused about registering for GST. So I tend to err on the side of register for GST rather than not, even though it's a little bit of hoo-ha to do it. You can do it online because, I mean, no one wants to go through, obviously, what we went through in the last few years. So let's not hope that ever happens again. But there are a lot of small businesses that fell through the cracks during COVID because they were not registered for GST. Because when this goes to being really purposeful and having those direct conversations when your business is set up. So a lot of the government grants that were provided to support businesses and industries that were shut down or really impacted, having already been registered for GST was used as a proxy for are they a business? Because going to that point about anyone can register for an ABN, having an ABN does not in itself create a business or make you in business. So as a the least worst option, the governments chose to use registration for GST as a proxy for is this a legitimate business operation and not a side hustle is kind of some of that terrible language they used. So a lot of small businesses missed out because it's always, if they make a decision, it's usually always it takes effect on that day because they don't want dodgy people then quickly going and registering for GST or just trying to steal grant money, which sadly happens. So a lot of small businesses actually missed out on a whole range of different really important financial supports because they hadn't registered for GST. Because when they set it up with their accountant, they were like, oh no, this is just starting out. Don't worry about that. You don't need to worry. So I tend to err on the side of registering for GST, not because I'm hoping anyone has to get a grant from the government because we all get locked down again, but just because it's setting yourself up for success for if you're hopefully growing your business. Look, the reality in your sector is that the average earnings, it's around about, for someone working full time, I don't mean employed, I mean the full-time effort is around 63 grand a year is the average in the arts and culture sector. And I got that data from the ATO just this week in advance of this. So, a lot of you wouldn't actually need to charge GST, but I think if you can find your way to do it, it's just setting yourself up well for the future.
Amazing, super helpful. A couple of other questions that have come in that I know are classic independent arts questions. One of them is around terms of payment. So often,
Yes, yeah.
you're an independent artist, you need the fees paid as quickly as possible. Perhaps you're invoicing to a university or a large organization
Yes.
who say they have a 30-day payment term beginning on the first day of the month in 3 months' time. It's a common tale. Is there anything that can be done to get the payment terms of the contractor met, or is it always on the payer's terms?
Brilliant, brilliant question. And as we know, it's usually the biggest ones that are the worst. And so there's been a lot of work done, particularly at the federal level, around large companies. So if you absolutely. So if you're contracting with a uni, for example, or like over $100 million kind of business, there are rules about when they're meant to pay their small business providers by as well too, because some of them were having 90 days. And then, and then they'd run late on that. So never mind even horrible payment terms that they weren't even complying with their own payment terms. So there is actually, bear with me, this is really public service language. So clearly no one who'd ever worked in branding or marketing came up with this name. There's a payment times register. Again, we can send you the link that actually provide you with info on different large organisations and their payment times to small businesses and whether they're good payers or bad payers. So the federal government is just in the process of introducing some tougher laws around this so that bigger entities will have requirements to meet faster payment times for small business entities, of which, I'm sure most people, if not all, are on the call would be in this bucket. Again, it goes to the terms at the start. So you can set whatever terms you like because it's not, you can, but it's their agreement to them effectively. So if you want to get paid in 14 days, well, be clear about that at the outset, that they are your payment terms, and you have the right then to insist on those. Practically, of course, they'll probably pay you before you'd need to get to the point of needing to do any enforcement-y stuff about that. But being really clear, and also if you're having some personal contact with people, being really clear about why it's really important to do that, and the impact it has on your cash flow. But no, you don't have to accept their payment terms, but you can have your own payment terms that by engaging you, they're agreeing to. Now, forcing them to stick to it is another thing. But it's definitely worthwhile being clear if you need to get paid earlier. So I would always encourage small businesses to look at, say, a 14-day payment time, because who wants to wait to the end of the month and then you're chasing it for another month or so, best case scenario. So 14 days is usually allows enough time for processes and stuff to happen in organisations.
Amazing. Linda, there are so many questions. I've got a big list, but we have run out of time. If people want answers to questions, they want different advice, there's resources, I'm sure there's lots of resources available in your presentation here. Also, I'm sure on the VFBC website. Any other tips or tricks of where people should go for more information?
Well, just encourage, like I said, every day, you don't only have to be in Victoria, jump onto business.vic.gov.au. ATO is also a great source of information. One thing I will say just before I go, this is really important. If you owe money to the ATO and you can't pay it, pick up the phone and talk to them. Do not kind of hope it's going to go away. If you've got a legitimate reason why, and you can show that you've got a genuine chance of having payment plans and stuff like that, they will give it to you. But if you don't engage with them, they can't, because they don't know your circumstance, and they won't. So definitely if you do, so the ATO's got heaps of education and information available, but if you do end up or you already are in a bit of a pickle with owing them money, definitely talk to them. And if you don't get satisfaction with them as a small business, ask to be escalated to their small business team, because they have a special team within the bowels of the massive ATO whose job it is to review stuff when the computer says no to small businesses, to actually go, let's have a look at this. This is not an evil person. They're trying their best. There's some financial viability here. Let's give them a fair chance to pay money on a payment plan. So ATO is great for education, but also can help you as well too.
Again, brilliant advice. It seems like it's coming back constantly to be nice, common sense, be really clear and direct in communication. And I think if we keep that going, then we're going to be in good hands. Linda, thank you so much for your incredible advice, your incredible presentation, and it's my great pleasure. She's here with us on screen to hand over now to our brilliant director here at Creative Workplaces. I'd love to thank Linda one more time and introduce the incredible Kate Schaffner.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Simon. And Linda, I did just want to say another huge thank you to you from us at Creative Workplaces for joining us and giving this webinar to everyone who signed on today. You've shared so much wonderful advice and resources that I know will be so helpful for people working as independent artists or as arts workers or even as small businesses. And we look forward to sharing those links with people next week. So thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, Kate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I would also just note for those who aren't Victorian, we do have links to other small business commissions on the Creative Workplaces webpage. If you scroll down on our webpage, you can find a help and support for your creative workplace. There is also a small business help heading there where you can find the links to the Victorian Small Business Commission and other equivalent organisations in other states and territories. A big thank you also to Simon Abrahams from our Creative Workplaces Council. Simon also being the Creative Director and CEO of Melbourne Fringe. We're so lucky to have you. Thank you for hosting this webinar today with Linda. We really value you dialing in from overseas too, so thanks so much. Thanks, Simon. Just a very, very brief update because we are at time. So at Creative Workplaces, we're continuing work on the Creative Workplaces website. The design is well progressed and we're about to do some user testing, which is very exciting. We're also progressing the content alongside this build. And so we'll keep you updated with that over time. We're also updating our consultation schedule after receiving some feedback on that recently, and we will be issuing a discussion paper in the coming weeks. Lastly, I wanted to let you know about our next webinar, which is on Respect at Work on the 24th of September. This is with Kate Jenkins, our Creative Workplaces Council Chair. Kate is the former Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and she also led the Respect at Work National Inquiry into Sexual Harassment in the Workplace. So is an excellent person to be giving this webinar. Alongside Kate, we are thrilled to be joined by Rosie Lord. So Rosie is a filmmaker with a passion for advocacy, and Rosie is also the chair of Screen Australia's Gender Matters Task Force. So she's an excellent co-host for this next webinar. Rosie is also a former investment manager at Screen Australia's production fund and was the co-VP of Women in Film and Television in New South Wales. Rosie recently also executive produced the comedy White Fever. She directed the rom-com Romance on the Menu and produced Starting From Now. Rosie is also an actor, and she's recently featured in season 3 of Total Control, on One Night Stand, and also The House of Gods. So the next webinar in September is something we're really looking forward to, and we hope that you'll join us then. Thanks so much.